Hey everybody, thanks for watching and welcome to video 6 in this 10-part series of how to set up your first marine aquarium. This section I'm going to talk about sumps, refugiums, and HOBs, also known as hang on the backs. So yeah, let's get right in and define some terms. First of all, go ahead and like, subscribe, ask any questions. I'm actually currently building a website as well, something that will be an educational website and also kind of just a blog for me. And once I have that up and running, I'll go ahead and post a link in all my videos so that you can check that out. There'll be links to YouTube videos and new content coming up. Anyway, overview of terms. Let's start here. I got some images. We're going to talk about a sump first, okay? And what you're looking at is a sump. And a sump, you often hear it in, talking about a basement. It's an area that collects water. That's it. So it's a separate container, usually directly below your display tank, your aquarium, that holds water and other equipment. So what you're seeing here would be below an aquarium, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a remote sump, it can be in the basement, it can be next to it, but typically the most common way is to have this directly below your aquarium. So when someone talks about a sump, this is what they're talking about. It doesn't matter how many sections it has or what kind of sump. A sump is just a container that holds water below your aquarium. All right, next up, we're going to talk about refugiums. People talk about sump refugiums. If you hear New York Stilo talk, he's always talking sump refugiums, and it sounds like it's one word. A refugium, okay, is literally a place of refuge. Okay, and it is a place. It is often like one chamber of your sump. Like if you're looking in here, it's its own chamber. You can have a separate refugium that's not a part of your sump, but oftentimes, as long as your system's big enough, you have it as one section of your sump filtration system. But yeah, it's one chamber or a separate hang on the back. What we'll talk about. It's where organisms like copepods, small organisms that fish and other animals will eat, and beneficial algae such as Catamorpha, Caulerpa, and it's a place where they're allowed to multiply and to grow in safety, free from any predators, basically. So there's a picture of a refugium. Next up, define the term hang on the back, or HOB. It refers to anything that hangs on the back, the side of your aquarium. Okay, so if you look here, here's a filter hanging on the side. This is fresh water, this is salt water. They can be tiny, they can be huge. A lot of small nano tanks will house everything that you would keep in a sump. Protein skimmer, filter socks, activated carbon, GFO reactor. They can make them really small and they can all fit directly in the HOB. Okay, but a hang on the back, it refers to a refugium or a filtration system that hangs on one side of the aquarium. Okay, so that's what an HOB is. Typically, you have an HOB if you don't have a sump, but that's not always the case. For example, in my system, I'm not going to, but I could put an HOB refugium on because I don't have space for a refugium in my sump. All right, next up is a canister filter. You still hear people talk about these. They can be used in freshwater or saltwater, although this is not by any means the primary way that marine enthusiasts filter anymore. But you'll hear the term, and it's important to understand what it is. A canister filter is exactly what you see there. It's an external aquarium filter that pumps water from the fish tank through various levels of filtration media and then puts the clean water back. Okay, so if you look, it would come down through here and out through here, and it would pass through various filters. It would pass through bioballs, activated carbon, possibly a sponge, and it does a lot of the work that a filter does. Okay, obviously you can't have things like a protein skimmer, which has really become the backbone of the reefing hobby, but you don't need a sump for this. It's self-contained, it's small, right? You would just have to clean it out and change the media somewhat frequently. Although this really is not very common anymore in the reefing hobby. I'm not sure if it is in the freshwater hobby, but I don't know. I can't really answer that one. And lastly, you'll hear about a wet, dry, or trickle filter. Okay, basically, why it's called wet, dry. Okay, if you look at this whole area, let me just go down a little bit, see if I can. Okay, the water line is right here. Okay, So this is all dry, right? The water is pumped down through or siphoned down through, and it's passed over a bunch of bioballs, okay? And we'll talk more about bioballs a little bit later. But basically, these are in a dry compartment, and the water passes over them, which basically means that they get a lot of oxygen, and they're able to convert ammonia to nitrate, all right? So basically, a healthy way of biological filtration. The water goes down to here, and then you pump it back. Again, not common in and of itself, but you might see some people still use a wet dry method as a part of their overall sump. They would just put it a little bit higher and then have their sump completely going there. Lastly, I want to talk about the Berlin filter method. People don't really talk about this anymore, but this is the most common method that reefers use. Okay, and basically the Berlin method is it's a term that talks about any method that uses live rock and a protein skimmer, basically. Okay, now there are various definitions of that, but people who use the Berlin filter method are using sumps, chambered sump compartments nowadays, right? They have live rock, live sand, either in their display tank or down in their sump, okay? And then they go through various filter stages. The primary one, which is going to be right here, is likely here. This could be the Refugium, but it could be here, which is their protein skimmer, okay? So that's the Berlin filter method. That's the method that most people use, or some sort of variation of that. Okay, we're going to move the camera, and we'll be back in a second. Overflows. What you're looking at here, I'll zoom back, okay, so you can see, is the overflow of my Red Sea Reefer 170, okay? An overflow, the section back here is called the Wier, okay? And a weir is basically a low dam you put across a river. So that's what this is. It is damming up the water, and it is creating this space back here, okay? And the overflow flows right over here, okay? And then this is my primary return area where it goes down into my sump. And then this is my emergency right there, which I don't hopefully use unless this becomes blocked up. Okay, there are different types of overflows out there, okay? This overflow is using something called a herbie method, okay? And a herbie method basically combines what you're seeing here. It combines two separate pipes going down, okay? Your primary being right here, and this one, okay, is connected on the bottom to a valve. Okay, and you regulate it using the herbie method to keep the water level at a certain level so that it's completely silent and overflow. Okay, so it's basically creating a silent siphon. The herbie method also has over here your secondary backup. If anything is to happen to this one to get it blocked, it will flow into this instead, allowing you time to go ahead and fix the problem. So you can see your primary in the herbie method right here, and your secondary, and they both flow down into the back. I don't want to talk too much more about this. This is the method. The herbie method is a really good method. There are also overflows called systems that use durso standpipes, D-U-R-S-O. You can check those out. They were pretty popular. I think they are still pretty popular in the hobby. A different way of plumbing it. This is a really standard overflow box, but the problem with this overflow box is you can see it's big and it takes up a lot of space. So there are overflow boxes that are considered low profile. The thing with a low profile overflow box is what happens is instead of putting the Wier, the overflow box in here, you drill out a hole in the back of your tank, and it basically, your plumbing goes through the back. The plumbing in an overflow box goes directly through the bottom of the tank, right? You drill a hole in the bottom. In an overflow low profile, it goes out the back. So a lot of people can't have that. But if you have a fish room or something, it could work really, really well. All right, stages of a sump. I'm just going to show you mine, and then I'm going to show you on a computer because you can be able to see it way easier. Okay. The first stage, and mine's pretty common. There are other stages you can add, okay? But the first stage of the sump is going to be way in the back here. Okay, it's going to be, if you follow these pipes down, it's going to be your drain chamber. And you're not going to be able to see it, but it's down there. It's where everything drains into. Okay, included in my drain chamber, as the water leaves my drain chamber, is my filter sock. Okay, then you have your largest, okay, which is this whole area here is my main equipment chamber. Okay, it could also be your fuge, you know. Mine's not big enough to really house both. But here is where I put my equipment. I have my protein skimmer, and then you probably can't see down here very well. Yeah, way too much going on. I have my reactor pumps, all that kind of stuff going in here. Okay, then you have it overflowing into the bubble chamber. You could also, it's where you put your filter floss, which is just another way of saying your sponge. Taking out some of the fine matter and also removing the microbubbles before they return. And then lastly, in the last chamber is your return pump chamber. This is where you usually put your return pump and also your... Okay, so the first chamber, all right, right over here where you're looking, okay, right on this side here, is where your drainage chamber, where the water is going to come down from your tank, and where you're going to put filter socks if you choose to. Filter socks being your primary mechanical filtration. If you have a big system, if you feed your system a lot, your filter socks will fill up every day, every couple days. I can run mine, if I use a filter sock, for a few days before it fills up. You want to replace your filter socks pretty frequently, so buy some extras, because the whole point is to physically remove all that matter, and if you don't, it will start breaking down into ammonia and phosphate, which are things you don't want at all in there. Okay? Then the water, this one has a lot of filter socks, goes into your main compartment here. Okay? This compartment is your refugium / your equipment. Okay, some people will have separate chambers here, but we'll just talk about it kind of as an all-in-one. If you use this as a refugium, this is where you're going to put things like miracle mud, maybe some live sand, maybe some live rock, and then some sort of macroalgae, right? Some sort of caulerpa or chaetomorpha. And basically, the macroalgae is going to consume your phosphates so that you can then physically remove it. And then if you use it for a live sand bed and live rock, hopefully what you're doing is you are populating it with copepods and other organisms that will then be returned into your return pump, into your display tank, that your fish, like mandarin fish, will then eat. And they absolutely have to have those to eat. Okay, in your equipment, fuge is also where you're going to put your protein skimmer, if we're talking about as equipment. A lot of people put their heaters in here, your reactors, your GFO, your carbon, you know, those sorts of things. Big container where you can put all that stuff. Okay, then what's going to happen is, let's say you put in here your protein skimmer, it's going to cause a lot of microbubbles. Now, microbubbles are just small bubbles, okay, and they just don't look good in your tank. They're not dangerous for your fish or anything, but reefers don't want them in their tank. So what happens is all these microbubbles are created, and they overflow into this little chamber here, okay? This is a chamber called the bubble chamber, all right? And what generally happens in here is you put your filter floss, and I don't know where that term comes from, which is a sponge, okay? You put the sponge right along the top here, okay? And what happens is the water, you know, all the microbubbles are created, it flows over here, and the water goes down and exits here. So all those microbubbles, or at least the vast majority of them, are going to be contained up at the top here, and it's also going to filter out whatever particulate matter you still have left. And then the water that's returned to the last section, the return chamber, is going to be virtually bubble-free, clean, and ready to be returned to your system. Okay? So in this system is where you're going to choose, in the last stage here, your return pump, this is where you're going to choose to put an AC pump or a DC pump. You know, I think we talked about this already, but, you know, the size of your pump, depending on the flow, you know, you choose a pump on gallons per hour or liters per hour. And remember that when the water from the return pump travels up, it's going to lose flow. So you need to take that in consideration, and there are different mathematical formulations you can do for how much flow that's going to be lost. Also, this last area here has a really stable water level. So if the water level decreases in your tank, this is where you're going to see it. You're not going to see it anywhere else. You're going to see it right here. So if your water level decreases too low, it's going to cause air bubbles to get into your return pump, and it's just going to shoot air bubbles out. So this is typically where people put an auto top-off system, all right? And you would put it, you know, right in this section here, and you would say that you want the water level kept to a certain level, right? And that's going to make sure that your water stays very, very stable. For an auto top-off system, there are several out there. Most of them use a ball valve, which is just a manual, you know, balloon-like thing that goes up and down, and it turns it on and off. The problem with using a float switch is if you don't clean it regularly, it can get encrusted with salt, with various other things, especially if you use caulk washer, and it could either freeze in the off or on position, and you could run out of water in your tank, and it could get really salty. You could destroy your pumps, or you could just have tons and tons of fresh water added, depending on how big your auto top-off container is. But there are some really good ones out there, so check out auto top-offs. You can also pair them, auto top-off systems, with like your Neptune Apex controller. There you're basically doing your own program. All right, let's briefly touch on plumbing. There are so many different ways to plumb a system, and the reefers are hard plumbed. What that means, if you look here, they use PVC pipe. Okay, I'm not going to talk too specifically because there's so much to talk about. There's hard plumbing versus soft plumbing. Hard plumbing uses PVC pipe. Okay, soft plumbing uses some sort of tubing, acrylic tubing, various other kinds of tubing. But there are pros and cons to each, which I'm not going to talk about in detail. It's easiest if you just get a system pre-plumbed. If not, when you're looking at PVC, you'll see things like Schedule 40, Schedule 80. That just has to do with how thick it is. Okay, Schedule 40 is definitely going to be... Schedule 40 is Schedule 80, so it talks about the thickness of them. There are things called unions, okay? And unions help disconnect pieces of plumbing. Gate valves and ball valves, okay? If you look right here, this is a gate valve. This red handle, you turn it, and there is a gate inside that opens and closes the gate. That's really, really good for fine-tuning. Right there is a ball valve. A ball valve just has basically a little circle that opens. It does the same thing, except it's not as good for fine-tuning. Okay, so gate valves and ball valves. There are check valves. I don't have a check valve, but a check valve is something you would put basically in one of these, and what would happen is a check valve is there so that water can only go one way. So for example, if the power goes out, my return pump fails, a siphon is going to get created. The siphon's going to go, right? The water is going to, instead of traveling out of that return pump area, it's going to travel down. Now with mine it's not a problem because not that much water can go, but some people's tanks could completely overflow. So you put in a check valve. Plumber's tape, something that I think is really, really common, but anytime you have a threaded a threaded tube or threaded pipe, right? You can't just screw them together and not expect a leak. You have to use plumber's tape. You basically just put that on and then you screw it together, and that will keep the water from coming out of there, from dripping out of there. There is vinyl versus silicone tubing, okay? If you look here, this is vinyl tubing. This is hard tubing, works really well. The only problem with vinyl tubing is it can be a little loud. And what I mean by that is the vibration from your return pump or from a pump will carry through that. Okay. There's also another kind of tubing which is more expensive. It's called silicone tubing. This is silicone tubing. It's made out of silicone, more expensive, less vibrations. Okay. When you are connecting your tubing, you need things called hose clamps, right? So if you look up here, this is a plastic hose clamp, okay? Ratchet clamp, there's different things you call them. They're amazingly difficult to find, right? And if you have to have it on here because, or else this could pop off at any time. You can find steel ones. The problem is you don't often want steel ones in the water because they will rust. So if you can find the plastic ones, that is awesome. Lastly, HOBs. I'm not going to talk specifically about them. There are hang-on-the-back filters that basically replicate a sump, right? They have small protein skimmers. You put bags of activated carbon in there. Sometimes you can even fit in small reactors, stuff like that. So they're basically like a mini sump nowadays. You can also buy one that's just a refugium, okay? That is just a safe place for your copepods or your macroalgae. That's it. Sorry, guys. That was super disjointed. I promise in the future, especially when my website's up and running, it'll be much more clear, much more laid out. But hopefully that'll give you an overview of what we're talking about when we're talking about sumps and hang on the back filtration, what the terms mean. And I know the videography is terrible, but thank you guys for watching. If you have a friend who wants to get into the hobby, or you yourself have never taken that dive, any questions, go ahead and ask them. Next video is going to be live rock, live sand, and biofiltration. And for those of you in the hobby, you know this is a hot topic, and so I'm going to try to talk about as much of that as I can, so that if you're new to the marine aquarium hobby, you'll have a good understanding and be able to make a decision that's going to best fit your needs and your tank. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a fantastic week.